And to talk about that, I'm very, very happy to welcome our next panelist, physical and virtual. So to talk about quantum computing as a national strategy, I want to welcome our first invited speaker. Big applause for Gonzalo Martinez de Azagra. He's co-founder and general partner at Cardumen. Here, please. I'm going to sit here. And to join us all the way from Amsterdam, I want to welcome my good friend and fantastic investor in quantum and working at Quantum Delta, Ton van der Noordende. Ton, hello, sir. Sorry, my Dutch is not that good. I need to practice.
No worries at all.
So, thank you both for being here. And this is not an easy topic. I know Gonzalo was asking me, like, how deep do we take this? Because it's a really complex topic. So let's start by giving a brief overview of what do we mean by quantum computing and what the race is all about. And Ton, I'm going to start with you.
Yeah, of course. I mean, that's the question to ask, in my opinion, for the next decades. I mean, essentially, quantum computing is seen as one of the options to increase computing performance. And essentially, what are we talking about? We're talking about, Moore's law. Moore's law is about doubling performance and cutting down costs every 2 years. And this is something that the semiconductor industry needs to continue. And so, quantum computing could be that, premise towards the future to increase computing performance.
What about you, Gonzalo?
Yes, quantum computing is going to be a revolution, like the internet was in its day. One of the things that quantum computing allows to do is computations that traditional supercomputers cannot do. Things like combinatorics, situations where you need to compute a lot of combinations very fast to make decisions in logistics or in simulation for molecule creation. These things take a long time for normal computers to do. And the minute you have quantum computing, these things are going to be almost instant.
Yeah. So I'm actually going to take that and throw it back again, because what are, in your mind, like very representative scenarios for the use of quantum computing? Going beyond cryptography, which is the usual, right? Where can we employ this that creates massive impact? Imagine we had right now full-scale, fully blown quantum computer. What would be a very powerful use case here, Ton?
I mean, of course, the caveat that is right now, it's still a very unstable technology, and we have not yet reached the status where we can actually make meaningful computations that classical computers cannot do, despite some of the claims from some of the big corporates. But I mean, just to give you one idea, we can, for example, test how drugs impact a cell. We can look at cellular aging, essentially looking at a free radical theory of aging, where we could actually maybe reverse aging. We can look at immune responses, bacterial viral infection solutions, which of course are unfortunately very actual in today's society. Material degradation, the development of new materials, chemical design. I mean, the possibilities are endless, and I think it's going to completely revolutionize everything we know in today's society.
Gonzalo?
Yes, according to analysts, the industry that's going to adopt this first is financial services, like they did for big data. So things like doing Monte Carlo computations and pricing of derivatives and things like that. So as soon as there are commercially available quantum computers, most likely it'll be financial services and banking who will adopt it. And they also mention many times, in addition to what Ton talked about, materials. So all of the advanced materials that have to do with structures or even oil and gas and things like that is something that analysts believe is going to be the first few early adopters.
Yeah, well, simulations, very realistic simulations, will be able to execute massively faster, orders of magnitude faster. It's interesting because it's funny you said, like, once commercial available quantum computers are there, but we have already commercially available. They're just probably not at a scale that we need so far. So ticking that box, how far do you think we are, Ton? What's the timeline for that arriving at force?
Well, this is a very interesting question. I think it coincides with, to be honest, also how private markets respond. And they've been responding quite aptly to the quantum computing developments. If you just look at, for example, the amount of capital privately invested since 2019 has doubled by almost a 9x multiple. And so as private capital comes in and researchers get more opportunity, more quantum dilution fridges, more lab facilities, more clean room facilities to develop the materials that are needed to build out and stabilize this quantum system and these individual systems, I think we can expect it to happen at an accelerated pace. And this is really a question. If you ask the market, for example, PsiQuantum, who's saying that with the funds that they have and achieve, they're going to develop a 1 million qubit system by 2030. Some researchers are less conservative, some are more. The answer is, probably somewhere in the next decade is where we're going to find some meaningful results. And I think that's actually quite interesting. Quite some companies working on, for example, on classical algorithms that are inspired by quantum computing already, and that can be implemented today already, like the Monte Carlo simulation that Gonzalo just mentioned.
Yeah, it's actually interesting that you bring this up because this was one of the first articles I ever wrote for my blog was about quantum computing, and one of the most obvious conclusions was even if we don't have the computer yet, because developing programs and doing algorithms in quantum programming is so vastly different, and it takes so long. You need mathematicians to actually deploy this stuff because you have to change the algorithms to more of an algebraic perspective and multi-space vectors. And so I told a lot of companies, you need to start now, because if you wait until the computer is there, you just won't have the people to do the development of the programs there.
That's correct. I think there's two aspects to quantum computing. One is the hardware part, which is where the technology leap is happening, but you need a software ecosystem around it. And for traditional electronics and computers, it's been based on transistors from the 50s, and everybody knows how to operate under, using silicon and these little switches that give you zeros and then allows you to add and do logic and then do programs on top. The problem with quantum is that there's still not enough knowledge spread out throughout the world to have hackers, to have programmers doing cool applications on top. And also, there's still, of course, a lot of development to be done in the hardware part of things, which is where Google and IBM and the rest of the large tech companies already have those quantum computings available. So it's a number of factors, but it'll take a while until the whole ecosystem grows. And just to give some reference and numbers, I really like the Gartner hype cycle, and Gartner positions quantum as reaching maturity in the next 10 years or before. So that gives you a framework. I don't know if I believe that. I think it'll be more specific applications that will be adopted slowly, and at some point it'll start going.
Yeah, that's a very interesting point. Oh, first of all, like 10 years is nothing. Like I was reading this meme recently on the internet. It says like there's 3 months till 2022. And they were saying, like, gosh, I still haven't processed 2020. How did that even happen, right? So it's going very fast. I mean, 10 years go very fast. And as you point out, developing the capabilities for the ecosystem is going to take time. And if you wait until those 10 years are hitting you, it might be too late, right? But you do bring a very interesting point, which is what I'm seeing from my side is, instead of trying to go for the main, let's say, crown, which would be the massive quantum computer, I'm seeing more and more teams getting pieces of what we already have of quantum innovation, of quantum hardware, and applying it to small mono-functional devices, like very, very precise detection, very, very precise calculations for certain areas, mostly in the scientific arena, but it's happening. It's being implemented as, if you want to say like this, like a new chip that you put on the phone, right? But for a very specific thing. That is already happening. And Ton, I don't know if you've seen this happening too. I believe you've been involved with some of these companies too.
Yeah, we actually invested in one company called Quantware recently, which designs, develops, and fabricates essentially scalable superconducting quantum processors. They came out of the famous Decarta lab based out of Delft University. The lead researcher is one of the only people in the world that actually can make these things, and it also comes into something really interesting with quantum, right? So I think we kind of touched about quantum computing technology. If you talk to the purists, people say it's about superposition and entanglement within qubits, right? States of qubits, and these qubits are contained in quantum devices, and these quantum devices need, the materials need to be designed. They need to be kept at low temperature, and there is a whole layer of applications and on the stack, on the hardware level, of companies that need to develop solutions in order to process. Just to give an idea, there's another company that's doing amazing work. It's called Delft Circuits, and they essentially developed, let's call it a coax cable to actually capture the output of the cables. That right now, at a small system level, it's maybe tens or 20s, but as you can imagine, if we build massively scalable systems of millions of qubits, we're going to have millions of cables. So there's a whole layer and industry being developed right now. And I agree, mostly it's about the RTOs, so the research facilities, but also since the emergence of the private capital, there's individual startups that are now needing and are requiring, for example, those quantum processors I just mentioned. So, and these things are right now, it's either do it yourself, and then you have a 90% risk ratio of a thing actually not really working, or you buy it commercially via one of these companies.
I don't have much to add to that, to be honest.
No, I was just remembering that I read recently there was this company, I think it's also Dutch. So, by the way, and I'm going to get to that in a second, the Netherlands is one of the key areas for quantum development and research in the world, not just in Europe. And I was reading, I think it was a Dutch company, that they were already selling quantum communication devices for instantaneous communication, and you just bought the whole thing. And they were already commercializing this stuff, and I was like, what are you talking? Like, I can buy that? And like, yeah, I mean, we have to do testing and calibration and stuff like that, but yeah, you can buy that. I'm like, okay, that's pretty rad. Anyhow.
I mean, essentially, yeah, you can buy those things off the shelf these days.
Go ahead.
I mean, you can essentially buy them off the shelf. And I think the reason why we're not seeing an even faster development there is the fact that a lot of these startups and companies, they are requiring massive CapEx investments to do faster research. For example, just to give an idea, getting access to a lab or owning a quantum dilution fridge takes what costs around 1.5 million. And we haven't talked about setting it up and characterizing the system and bringing in your own software application. So that is, I think, the next big step, which is also, I think, one of the primary concerns on the European level, which is, where are we going to attract those massive funding rounds that are needed to build those companies into the next level to actually develop a sizable, massive industry like one of the things, and I think my good friend Michael Jackson actually mentioned it the other day in a post on LinkedIn. But I mean, if you look at the most valuable company in Europe right now, you can arguably say that's ASML. And so how are we going to, from a European perspective, build companies that are core in the supply chain infrastructure of these future technologies?
Well, for those of you that don't know that company, he said the most valuable company, they do the optics for the semiconductor industry. So the capacity to build 5 nanometer chips and transistors comes from a Dutch company that's reselling this technology to the Taiwanese and, well, anywhere in the world. And they are the most valuable company in the world and one of the most, I would say, strategic and critical assets that's coming out from Europe. And speaking of which, so, because this is so complex and so expensive, what are the roles of institutes and universities and research centers around this? Because that's one of the things that worries me a lot from a national strategy perspective, is that you have to deploy a lot of resources to become proficient in quantum. So what are the roles that we're seeing of those research institutes and universities? And I know for a fact, Ton, that you've been researching this extensively. You've been talking with universities all across Europe. So what's your take on that?
Well, this is a multi-layered, I would say, challenge. So it starts, of course, with the research and institutes and universities themselves that need to open up and be more receptive towards entrepreneurship, for example. So there's different options to license and sell IP coming out of universities. But just to give you an idea, I find it crazy that when there's an announcement of a university spin out that raises 35 million or gets sold, that's actually news. If you look, for example, at universities from across the Atlantic, like Yale or Stanford, they're deploying massive amounts of capital into the venture capital ecosystem. And now, if you look at the bottom line on the balance sheet, almost, for example, in Yale's case, 40% of all revenue flowing back to university comes from investments in, among other things, foundational technology like quantum computing. And so what on the bottom level, we hopefully can change a little bit of the perspective there, where we will give more freedom to research and postdocs, for example, to have a gap year or a pause or become co-founders in a company, but still being involved with the lab facilities. And on the other side, there is, I think, and this is mainly a concern right now, is that Europe is incredibly scattered, and universities collaborate on the scientific level, but not really yet on the venture level. So we need these technologies to combine. There's not one country that will develop a singular quantum computing or a singular system. So yeah, we need to see if those national programs actually add up and stack up to a collective approach that will lead to a more sustainable outcome for the entire continent and hopefully the world.
And Gonzalo, how do you see that here, so for example, especially in Spain? Because it's like...
Yeah, I mean, I'll touch upon Ton and I'll bring Spain into the picture, but I do think that there's two aspects. One, which is what Ton talked about, which is sort of the private aspect of things and investment in venture capital. And the other one is public investment, right? And there has to be a partnership between the two, and it has to be managed. And there has to be a strategy around it where there's more collaboration, there's more visibility, and things start to work even from the level of high school, where we're encouraging people to learn about these things. Of course, university having specific programs, clusters, and so on. So there's a lot to do. There needs to be a bigger plan. From the perspective of venture capital, I'd say that if referring back to the Gartner hype cycle, we're beginning to go up the curve in terms of investment. People are talking about it. In 2019, there was around 200 million in investments, maybe a little more. These are sources, PitchBook, and so on. But they claim that in 2021, it's going to close at around $1 billion, probably a little bit more. So it's going up very fast in terms of venture capital investment into quantum computing companies. But like Ton said, the deals are happening in the US, right? Or sometimes some Israeli companies as well. Where's Europe? Again, I wouldn't say we've missed completely the boat, because we're just beginning, and so there's still a chance but we're a little late already. And when it comes to Spain, I'm not an expert in quantum computing strategy in Spain. I just researched it over the last couple of days. I haven't found anything, right? And that is a disaster. So we need to come up with a plan. Each of the European countries, I would say, would have to look for a niche, coming back to, we can't win against the 10 billion that the Chinese say they're going to invest, or we could perhaps compete with the US, because as far as I understand, they didn't devote much more than the European Union, but still, we need a better plan. It seems like the US is already better organized around universities and research centers, collaborating much more than Europeans are.
Yeah, and that kind of gives me space to bring up this, and we were just talking about this on the backstage around geopolitics and how quantum computing is becoming like this geopolitic weapon or weaponry. And it's a convergence of trends, right? You have the fact that the semiconductor industry right now is highly disrupted, right? So most of a big chunk of the supply chain is in Asia. It's being taken over by China to a certain degree, but all the IP and all the knowledge of how to do that is in Western countries, as Tom was saying, in the Netherlands. So the question is, are we going to skip one rung of the innovation ladder and go directly to quantum? And it seems that China is investing heavily in quantum computing, specifically more on the quantum communication space and quantum optics. And if you look at the patents that are pouring out, they're the fastest growing country in terms of patents around quantum anywhere. Now, you have on the other side, you have the US, that is also pouring a lot of money there, and Europe sandwiched in between. And so I wonder, what is your take more maybe from that quantum as a political weapon, like as a national weapon in this kind of semiconductor computational race that's happening right now? Ton?
Well, yeah, to be honest, I mean, I don't have much information on what's happening in China. But for example, what is interesting, if you look at the position of Europe in this, is that, well, maybe start at the US. The US has the ability and capacity as one of the premier countries in the world to really build fantastically large companies, but they're actually really bad at building small companies. And that's where Europe, I would say, fills in the gap. And that's also why I think US doesn't have really proper supply chain or infrastructure around, for example, the semiconductor industry. So if we can combine, those insights, and we can sort of like leverage and double down on that, we have definitely a position in the playing field. But let's be realistic from a geopolitical perspective. I mean, we haven't really touched upon that, but you just mentioned the future quantum internet. Essentially, we're talking about quantum computers that are connected to each other over longer term distances. One of the companies actually that we recently invested here in the Netherlands is called QFox. They're building a quantum transducer. Again, TRL level is probably close to 1 or 2, so nothing yet in the pipeline, but they're developing based on the theory. And then these are of course key technologies that we need to make sure that you have a proper fundament, also on a national level, and also of course on the European level. So yes, we'll have to see how this develops in the next coming years.
Yeah, I think China has accepted the fact that, as you mentioned, a lot of the IP for many advanced technologies is still in the Western world, but have recognized that quantum computing is probably the next revolution, let's say, in technology, and they want to be leading that. So they are the factory of the world, but they're also the brain factory of the world. So I think they want to upgrade their economy to even more value add, as we've seen in the last decade.
And speaking of that, and Ton actually brings back this idea, like, well, you have to act as a region like Europe or stuff like that. There's also a big importance on drafting a good national plan. And I believe, as far as I know, the most complete and the most advanced national plan for quantum computing is in the Netherlands. So I would love to hear, what does a country needs? Like, go a little deeper into what kind of strategies should a nation follow to develop their quantum strategy?
Yeah, I mean, so the Quantum Delta Foundation was awarded 650 million euros last May by the Dutch government. So it's a state-funded project, and I think there's a combination of activities that you need to entail. But you start at the fundamental level and see if you can actually open up and create the infrastructure level. So clean rooms, nano labs, facilities, and make sure that not only university research and institutes can tap into it, but also other companies and also potentially, actually, that's what we're working on right now for next year, that let's say that an Oxford or UCL-based company could actually fly over to the Netherlands and work remotely from Delft with one of the quantum dilution fridges that are opening up. So one is, I think, the collaborative nature and the buildup of the infrastructure play. The other one is, of course, the support on the research side. So, of course, we should not forget that this is still highly fundamental, and we need to collaborate on that institutional side. And the other thing, and I think that's actually where we are absolutely unique in the world, because I think there's now already 15 national programs. By the way, you can also argue, of course, should you put that much money into a national program instead of directly funding it? But I think the exciting part is, for example, that at Quantum Delta, for example, I'm now managing a carve-out of around 22 million euros, where we have separate, integrated programs with a single sign-on from start to finish. So regardless of the stage or TRL level the company is in, they can actually knock on our door. We'll pick them up. We'll invest a 50K safe note against proper terms, without maturity dates, without interest rates, so that research can think about incorporating, think about IP and licensing, and then actually go back and then actually open up and unlock the doors of the international venture capital. Because we're talking about, there's around 400 deep tech investors in the US and Europe that collectively represent almost 40 billion euros in asset management. So the potential is out there. The question is, can we discover, curate, and find a sustainable way to let these companies grow? So I think a collective approach between venture and research and science is definitely the way to go. And if you ask me personally, of course, my personal opinion is that all the money from national programs should go into startups directly.
What about you, Gonzalo?
No, following in his words, I think it has to be much better defined. I don't think probably anybody in the audience here has heard of any of the strategies regarding quantum computing in Spain, and I think we're still back, with this storytelling of Spain as an entrepreneurial startup, as an entrepreneurial country. We're past that. That is obvious. Open innovation is here to stay. You need, in addition to internal R&D, to work with startups, and so it's time for Spain to choose where they want to play. They can't compete in size, but they can probably find some niche where we have, and I would leverage in terms of the Spanish economy, some of our strengths in tourism and food, areas, and start thinking how quantum computing could apply to those to see if we are working only on the software or the hardware or both.
Well, we do talk a lot, so quantum communication would be fantastic for us.
Absolutely, absolutely, absolutely.
So we do have a little bit of time, and I don't know if the team is prepared, but we could take one question if it's short and to the point. Anyone wants to ask a question? This is a highly unique thing, but questions that you got doubts about this. We have leading experts here doing it for real. Any questions, anyone? No? You got flashed.
We need more questions. I mean, this
exactly. This is exactly the point. We need more questions, people engaging more with this. Anyone? No? Well, okay. Well, with that, I want to thank you very, very much, Gonzalo, for joining us here. Ton, I know you have a back-over-back agenda, so thank you very much for making the time to join us here, and it's an absolute pleasure having you and sharing this topic with you. Please, big applause for both of them. Thank you, Ton. Thank you.